What's up guys, it's Mindset Performance Coach Adam Carmichael here. In today's video, we're going to be looking at the difference between strategy leaks and mental game leaks. Now today's video was inspired by a conversation I just had recently with a poker player, and he was asking me, Adam, how do I know if I'm making a strategy mistake? How do I know if there's an error in my thought processes? Or how do I know if it's just a mental game leak that I need to address? I thought it was a really good question, which I had not thought of in those terms before, but it's really good to identify what is the difference, all right? So at the end of today's video, if you stick around to the end of it, you'll know the difference between strategy leaks and mental game leaks. You will know what the root cause of each of these leaks is and how to start working through them, all right? And how to start fixing those leaks as they come up, all right? So first of all, strategy leaks. What is a strategy leak? All right, so I would define a strategy leak as any play you make which is costing you EV. All right, so it could be in terms of a mistake, a strategy leak in terms of it costs you EV, it's a negative EV play, or it could be a very positive EV play, but there's a more profitable line you could choose. All right, so say for example, you're using a 75% river size in all your spots or in a certain spot, and it would generate more EV to overbet. All right, that would be a strategy leak because there's a more optimal line, right? So you're costing yourself EV, all right? We'll go into where they come from after, but now let's talk about mental game leaks, all right? So what's the difference? What's the difference between a strategy game leak and a mental game leak? Well, a mental game leak is when there's a difference between your in-game strategy and your out-of-game strategy, all right? So you have a predefined strategy that you're going to use, but in-game, you see yourself deviating from that strategy, often in a negative way, all right? So for example, let's say you're looking for your hand histories and someone overbets a river spot and you called it in-game, and then out-of-game, when you look back on that hand, you go, that was a clear fold. It was a clear fold. So there's a disconnect what you would have done out-of-game compared to what you did in-game, right? A disconnect. There's a strategy difference, all right? So if you acted on the strategy you wanted to, then we'll call it a strategy leak, all right? But because you're acting differently out of game compared to in game, it's a mental game leak, all right? So let's have a look at where strategy game leaks come from, all right? So first of all, we need to realize that the reason we make strategy game leaks is because we don't know any different, all right? We think we're making the right play, all right? So they come from blind spots. So all of your strategy leaks come from blind spots. You think the strategy that you're using is optimal or good or best, but in reality, there's a better strategy that you're unaware of. All right, so as we can see, it's a bit of a problem because we're not really aware of what's going on. All right, I'll talk about how we can start to get around this later on, but for now, we just need to know it's coming from a blind spot. All right, mental game leaks, on the other hand, come from one of two places. They come from the ego or your emotions, all right? So what does that mean? What does a mental game leak from the ego mean? First of all, the ego is a construct that we create of ourselves, all right? And very often we want to protect our ego, all right? So if you make a mental game mistake from the ego, you're generally trying to protect a part of yourself or protect yourself in general, all right? So let's say, for example, somebody makes a big river play, an all-in bluff on me, and then I act from the ego, I might want to protect myself. I might go, wait a second, this guy's pushing me around. I'm sick of this guy going all in, I'm going to call here, all right? So I'm doing it from a defensive position. I feel threatened, therefore I'm acting in a certain way. Now, acting from the ego can be both aggressive and passive, all right? So that example was aggressive. On the flip side, if somebody raises me on the river, I could treat it as a threat to myself, to my ego, and I could fold to stop myself from potentially being in a dangerous situation, all right? So you can act both aggressively and passively from the ego, all right? But basically coming from this construct of wanting to protect yourself. It's very often very primal. You're doing things that you don't want to be pushed around. You don't want to be threatened, and you're acting from this lens, all right? And then we've got emotions, and emotions and the ego kind of interplay a lot. But they're different, all right? We can act from the ego without the emotions and vice versa. All right, now when you act from an emotion, think about, let's say, anger. What happens is you respond to the emotions. The emotion is very dominant. Let's say I'm feeling angry. Somebody makes a check raise on the river against me. If I act from anger, what I could do is I could raise him or I could call, but I'll do something aggressive because he's trying to push me around. All right, so he's, in my opinion, trying to push me around. So I'm acting from the emotion. Let's say I re-raise him all in, and then because my mind doesn't justify acting from emotion, my mind will try to rationalize that. All right, so the mind will say, I mean, he's got to have some bluffs there. I mean, this guy's really aggressive. I need to have some rebluff range here. So your mind will try to justify it. All right. So the mind likes to tell a congruent story of how we acted. But in reality, you felt angry. You acted from that anger, and that was it. All right. You made a mental game leak because you acted on your emotion, and then the mind tried to justify why it was correct. You know this is true when you look at the spot outside the game and you go, I shouldn't have been aggressive there. I should have followed it. Why was I aggressive? But in the moment, if you go back to it, there was an emotion there, or there was the ego. All right. Now, because the ego is very primitive, it comes from a primal part of the brain, and so does your emotions. Your emotions come from a set of the brain called the limbic part, which is like deep inside the brain, which is very primal. It's very protective. They very often go into play. All right. So when you're feeling threatened, very often there's emotion that goes with that. All right. But all you need to know for now is that your mistakes of the mental game are coming from either the ego or your emotions. All right. Now, strategy leaks. Let's have a look at those first. How can we fix something that comes from a blind spot? How do we fix the leaks that we're making in our games if we don't know they're there? All right. Now, the way to do this is to seek other perspectives. All right. In order to know your blind spots, you need to seek different perspectives. All right. Now, this can come in many shapes and forms. The best different perspective you could get would be to get a high stakes player or someone who crushes your game, has a better win rate than you, and pick their brain on how they play spots different to you. Ideally, get them to look over your game and to assess it and basically tell them, critique how you're playing differently. So really put a magnifying glass on your leaks by observing what you are actually doing and how you're actually thinking. All right, that's the ultimate. Obviously, that's not attainable for everyone, but seeking perspectives overall is the way. Another way you can seek perspectives is to talk with other players, all right? Talk strategy, have a study partner who stress tests your idea. If you have a study partner who thinks different to you about poker and you respect his opinion, very often you'll get different perspectives on how to play hands, all right? So because it's a blind spot, you won't know until it's stress tested by somebody external who puts some magnifying glass on that. You could also get different perspectives from a solver. If you're using a solver, that will show you how GTO plays, what the optimal theory is. It might not apply to your opponent type in that moment, but it gives you a new perspective of what to do. All right. You could also use a database analysis to look at spots that potentially you've got a low win rate or you're not making as much money as you could be, and potentially that could illuminate some errors that you're making. But as you can see, blind spots are difficult, right? It's difficult to find our blind spots because we don't know what we don't know. And if the ego gets in the way and we start making protections of why we want to think how we do and we want to protect our strategy, all of a sudden we become really, really stuck and really, really trapped. All right, but the goal is seek new perspectives. That's why you should have a very regular study pattern. You should have friends or other players you're talking strategy with. Ideally have some sort of coach who can look over your game and assess you, or at least some form of players you respect who can look in your game. And also regular analysis of your game to find strategy mistakes, all right? With blind spots, the key is knowledge. We need to increase our knowledge span so that we're aware of more optimal strategies, all right? And the key to seeking better perspectives is open-mindedness and curiosity. Having worked with lots of high-stakes players, both of those attributes are very, very dominant in high-stakes players. They're open-minded and they're curious. If you've got those two attributes, you will seek answers, you will seek perspectives that differ from yours, and you will find your way to navigate your strategy mistakes, all right? Then we've got our mental game leaks, all right, come from the ego and the emotions. Now, the way to spot these is being aware that certain events will trigger a mental game leak, all right? So mental game leaks very often repeat themselves, all right? That the same kind of circumstances repeat and the same mistake happens, all right? So let's say you're calling too wide in river spots because your ego is being very protective and you're not able to fold this spot even though you know you should, all right? That will repeat itself over and over as long as the same conditions are met. So if the conditions are met in the same way, I call that a trigger. So to fix your mental game leaks, get very clear on the events that trigger your responses, then get very clear on how you're thinking in those moments and how you're feeling in those moments, all right? The way I like to look at it is events trigger a default program. A default program means a way you act in that situation. Think of a computer program, you click on it, the default program runs up, all right? Same with our lives. We go, as poker players, we go for our existence and we're going to get triggered by certain events which cause mental leaks. It's a program that runs. So understand the current program, all right? Understand how you're thinking, the emotions that you're feeling in that situation. Then you've got to get very hyper vigilant of that situation. All right, so let's say it's a river spot and you're calling too wide. You need to really, really draw a magnifying glass on every single river spot that you call wide. Draw a magnifying glass so you're aware of how you're feeling, all right? You then need to come up with a new way of acting in that moment when you feel that way. What does that mean? So it means that you're going to feel the same things in that motion, in that moment. You're going to get triggered in the same way. You need to treat the trigger as a catalyst to choose a different action. All right, so for this example, if you're overcalling, you would choose to change the trigger to a, when I feel this way, when my mind has these thought patterns, that's a signal to fold. All right, so you're acknowledging the old trigger, you're acknowledging the old program, and you create a new one. All right, I do a whole coaching program on how to do this. It's very in-depth, but the mechanisms are the same. All right, identify the trigger, have awareness, and change the action in the moment. All right, and the goal is for your out-of-game strategy to match your in-game strategy. All right, so when you're looking at your hand histories and you're going, all right, yep, I would have played it that way. Yep, that's the way I should have played it. If it's like, oh shit, mistake, I wouldn't have done that. Then there's a gap, a disconnect between out-of-game strategy and in-game strategy. All right, you want to close that gap. All right, so over time, you want to be doing regular study sessions, having coaches or mentors or other poker players who you chat strategy with regularly. So your strategy gets better and better. You have less and less blind spots, and your strategy is constantly improving. And then you want to work on your mental game leaks. So your out-of-game strategy and your in-game strategy start to merge. All right, and over time, they become the same. All right, and you play the same out-of-game as you would in-game. Now, what most players do, they concentrate all of their energy on strategy, trying to improve their strategy, find their blind spots, find the next secret strategy, and no work here. And what happens is their strategy gets better and better, but the mental game gets worse and worse, and the gap between their in-game strategy and out-of-game strategy becomes huge. Before you know it, they're having conversations and like, yeah, I know what I'm doing, I know what I should do, but I don't. I know I should act that way, but I don't. All right, if you're that person, you need to spend time here, all right, not here, because that's widening the gap, all right? Ideally, you improve them both together. A lot of players need to work on their mental game leaks more than their strategy leaks. All right, guys, hopefully that give you guys a good framework. Hopefully you guys can see now strategy leaks come from blind spots. Mental games come from the ego or emotions, often together as a cocktail, and you need to be working on overriding both of those. All right, guys, let me know if you enjoyed this video in the comments. Give it a like before you go. There's going to be plenty more mindset and performance videos for poker players coming your way very soon.